Morning, guys. We are going to look a little bit at an overview today. We're not really going to go too much into depth. This will probably take 5-6 minutes, something like that. The majority of your day is going to be spent doing some either gender-related exercises or looking up the different genders recognized by the APA. Looking at some different handouts that I posted on Google Classroom. There is a progress check, which you guys will get to in a second as well. But I do want to get through a little bit of notes, just kind of make it so that we can get to where we need to get to before we get to spring break. So we're going to look at gender, sex, sexuality, kind of the differences between them. This particular unit in the book is not necessarily covered in a lot of other books. As far as like an individual chapter by itself, it's covered like with some other types or other topics, I guess is a good way to put it. It is, well, currently, as we sit here today, an important topic because the amount of people that are coming about gender fluidity or having their voices heard. So it is something that's kind of at the forefront now. So your book actually does do a pretty good job of explaining what we know, what we don't know, kind of thing. So we're going to briefly talk about it today. We're not going to get too much into depth today. On your AP exam, I think it's like 3 to 4%. So it's not, like I said, a huge chunk on your exam. So first and foremost, the difference between sex and gender. So I'm assuming that you guys know this, but we're going to still cover it anyway. This is something that I'm guessing Mr. Tanner talks about in health class, and you guys learn about it in bio. But first thing on there is sex, and that is properties of a person to determine his or her classifications as male or female. Okay, so basically it's what you're born with. Okay, so it's based off of genetic makeup, female physiology versus male physiology. Okay, as you can see there, you get an SRY gene, which creates testes, which creates androgen, which is the male physiology. Okay, most people are aware of, maybe not all, that female is actually the default condition or the default sex, and obviously this has to happen for males to take place. Physiologically speaking, there are more females in the world than there are males. Okay, that is why, because females are the default. So we're going to get into chromosomes and chromosomal anomalies as we go throughout this entire thing. So you guys do need to know that you have 23 pairs of, well, chromosomes. Sex chromosome is the 23rd pair of sex chromosome, or chromosome, sorry. So if you have chromosome XY, you're a male, sex-wise. If you're XX, female, looking at sex. Now, the thing that's confusing for a lot of people is when you talk about gender. Okay, most people associate gender with sex, and they think it's the exact same thing. That's not true. Gender is the social and physiological aspect of being male or female. So it's your identification, not necessarily biologically speaking what you are, but how you socially and physiologically identify. So it is your personal understanding of who you are. Gender identity is just that kind of where you belong or where you feel more comfortable. Now, in the last, I would say 5, 6, 7, 8 years, the idea of gender being concrete has kind of been changed to gender fluidity. So it's not necessarily where you belong all the time. It's what do you feel, I guess is a decent way to put that. Okay, it used to be if you had what's called gender confusion, it was called androgyny, or you would be androgynous, which means that you don't really have a specific gender. You are fluid, you are back and forth and all over the place depending on how you feel. So once again, the big difference between these two things, or these three things, is sex is genetic makeup, gender is social identity, gender identity, where you feel like you belong, and then androgyny is not really knowing where it is. It's either back and forth. Okay, so this is a handout that I actually put on Google Classroom today. It actually does a decent job of kind of explaining what gender identity is, gender expression is, biological sex is, and then sexual orientation is. So it just says gender identity is how you in your head think about yourself. It's the chemistry that composes you, your hormonal levels, and how you interpret them. Gender expression, okay, is, well, how you demonstrate your gender based on the traditional gender roles through the ways you act, dress, behave, and interact. Biological sex, that's this guy over here, we just talked about it. So, how you objectively measure organs, hormones, chromosomes, so on and so forth. And then sexual orientation is who you physically, spiritually, and emotionally are attracted to. So that's kind of a decent handout to show you the difference between all these, because a lot of people get them really confused. So I just think it makes it a little easier. So briefly, just an overview. Yes, we're going to cover those three things we just looked at. We're also going to look at disorders at some point in time. That's like the last thing for this particular chapter. They're called disorders of sexual development, or sexual disorders. So DSDs are the definition for it is a condition in which the development of chromosomal, gonadal, or anatomical sex is atypical. So atypical would be anything that is considered to be outside of the so-called norm. Okay, now obviously that norm is changing, and people, for the most part, are, well, okay with everything. I've told you guys that several times. Like me personally, do whatever you want to do. It's your decision, whatever your heart desires. Okay, and I think that's where a lot of people are kind of headed, as of like today, as far as like sociology and kind of what the belief is. So what studies have shown, and a lot of people thought you would automatically get to a certain day and like a switch would flip and all of a sudden you'd have like gender confusion or gender identity issues. What they're finding now is that these are kind of presented at birth. Okay, you see some anomalies at birth that there's a correlation to. That's that whole atypical thing. So what those are, we're not necessarily going to get into. It's more of a biological side of things, but they have determined that some of this stuff does take place at birth. Okay, now some people, obviously at birth, are not clearly male or female. For whatever reason, they were born atypical in some way, shape, or form. Now, obviously, that can have a role in what's called a sexual development disorder as well. Okay, it does go a little bit more in depth with this in the book, so make sure you guys spend time actually doing the reading you're supposed to. So we're not going to go over this today. We'll get over this on Monday. But the first thing we're going to start to look at is transgender. Okay, obviously the key word there being gender. So once again, it is your physiological gender differs from your physical sex. Okay, so once again, sex is that biological thing. Gender is your emotional, what you believe, that identity that you actually have, societally speaking. Okay, so it just depends on who you are and how you actually feel. We will get into this, like I said, more in depth as far as gradual stages. We'll get into gender dysmorphia, or dysphoria, sorry. Why males are a little bit more common, so on and so forth. So that's kind of where we're headed going forward. Like I said, it's just an overview today, just kind of a brief understanding of what we're headed towards and what we're going to start to do. It is, once again, something that is kind of at the forefront of society, so it is important to talk about. It is important to discuss so that you guys are aware of, well, what's going on around you. So, anywho, that's all as far as just notes and looking at some stuff today. All of these, by the way, are on Google Classroom as well.